So as usually, let's talk a little bit about our releases in general. So we release 4 times a year. This was our first release of this year, and we released it about 2 weeks ago. So what I'm going to show you and talk about is something that you can already download from your customer portal, and you can play with the new features if you'd like. Let's talk a little bit about what's new in the CloverDX 6.4. As usually, we have quite a lot of improvements in all parts of the product. I'll go over these in more detail separately. If you'd like, you can consult the detailed release notes, which we publish on our website. This is a list of everything that has been changed, especially pay note to the compatibility changes or bug fixes and so on, which can help you figuring out whether you need to change something in your jobs as you migrate to the latest version of Clover. With that said, let's have a look at the new features. So first, I'll talk about the Wrangler improvements. The first thing that we have there is that we implemented step grouping and step conditions. These are 2 new features that allow you to work better with the list of steps in Wrangler. I'll show you a little bit later on the demo, but as you can see, you can create groups of steps that allow you to organize your list of steps a little bit better. So you can, for example, hide the ones that you don't want to work with and group them based on their logical grouping so that steps that make sense are together in a single group. This is quite useful, especially if you have jobs that are a little bit more complex. In situations where the job list is longer than the screen, it can save quite a lot of scrolling and quite a lot of time in trying to understand what the job is doing. Step conditions are similar in that they help you build more complex transformations by basically allowing you to enable or disable steps based on a condition. This condition is evaluated for every row that you process. And whatever the condition is, right now it's a formula, for example, it will be evaluated, and if the formula is true, the step or the whole step group will be executed. If not, it will be skipped. This is something that allows you to simplify your jobs, especially what I've seen is that it helps our users reduce the complexity of their conditional expressions within formulas. And I'll show you again what that looks like and how it works a little bit later on a demo towards the end of the presentation. Another new feature in the Wrangler is the ability to assign constant value or static value in your mapping directly to any target field. This is something that will make your mappings and in general your jobs that map from some sort of data to a specific target much simpler. In the past, if you wanted to do something like this, you had to add a column which always contained a single value, what was the value that you wanted to assign. And that, of course, is quite cumbersome. And if you have several columns like that, it makes the job design unnecessarily complex. With this new feature, you can simply configure any value as a static value and map it directly to your target field. Again, I'll show you what it looks like and how it works on the demo. And finally, we've improved the formula editor in Wrangler. So anywhere where you can edit formulas, whether it's a full formula like I'm writing there or just an expression in a filter step, you'll get better editor. It now has much better content assist. You can see on the little animation there that it now offers functions. It's got real-time feedback on your syntax errors and so on. So it understands the formula in more detail than what was possible before. So it will be much easier for you to write something that makes sense rather than having to wait for the formula to run before saving the step. So that's everything as far as Wrangler goes. Of course, there are many smaller improvements and usability fixes that you'll see throughout the Wrangler product. Let's now talk about the server. The first thing that I'll talk about is the data apps. This is our feature that helps us deliver content in a simple way to business users. And many of our customers are using data apps to provide, for example, some sort of reports or ad hoc job execution and so on. And what we've added in this release is the ability to return HTML or web pages and images directly as a result of a data app. The preview screen for a data app will now show the output directly rather than kind of forcing you to download the output and view it the other application. Additionally, we've made the development of data types a little bit easier, and the deployment of them in multi-tenant systems easier by allowing to publish multiple instances of the same data type on one server. In the past, this was something that required you to change the name of the data type in some way so that the naming doesn't collide. Right now, you can do that automatically by, for example, specifying a prefix in the configuration of the whole sandbox. And as always, there are many smaller changes within data types. For example, better support for metadata propagation in the output and so on. All of this, of course, applies to data services as well, because they share common infrastructure. When talking about the output types for data types, as I mentioned, we can do HTML and images that are displayed directly. I'll show you an example of that a little bit later, but this is what it looks like. Right? When you return excuse me, a picture from a data type or from a data service, it will be displayed right there in the preview screen. Before, in previous version of Clover, it would be just this part where it would allow you to download the file and view it in some external application, but it would not show it in here. So with this change, you have the ability to return or build much more complicated data types that provide more complex outputs that are shown in a very simple way to your users rather than relying on them to download something and view it from their computer. We've also started publishing CloverDX server as an image on Docker Hub. This is something that will allow you to install server much faster compared to what you've been able to do so far. This image is based on our Docker file that we've been publishing for a while, but now it's been built as an image, so it's much easier to run it. You don't have to configure anything. It contains all the requirements to run the server. The only thing that you'll need, except for this Docker file, is an external database where Clover will keep the configuration. This is typically not something that you would put into a container, but rather it will live somewhere else. So you can pull the image from the Docker Hub and run it in just few simple steps. We have documentation in the page that shows you which parameters you can pass to the image to configure, for example, the database connection, the memory size, and so on. So you can fine-tune the container to your liking to fit the environmental requirements that you have. And this is something that will be improving over time, since this is the way that many of our customers are now running Clover. Docker is very popular and is a very simple way of running tools like Clover, especially if you are doing something like DevOps or any sort of automation around your infrastructure. This is something that should help you quite a bit. Continuing the DevOps team, we've added new API into our REST API. This time we added API endpoints for libraries. So you will be able to list, create, update, and change libraries within the server. This is something, again, that you can use, for example, during automated deployments. We have some clients that already are playing with this, where they are using, for example, Jenkins to orchestrate creation of their environments based on configuration in version control. And since they are often using libraries, this is something they can use to deploy libraries directly from Jenkins, for example, when a new version of a library becomes available within their version control. So kind of expanding the API capabilities and the automation that should help you, especially if you are doing some sort of automation for your deployments. As always, we have improvements in Designer as well. The first one is that we now provide native builds for Apple CPUs, M1, M2, and M3. Up until now, when you ran Designer, it was running within the Rosetta virtualization layer on Mac. Right now, or from this point, it's no longer necessary, so you can download a native build, which is actually recommended. If you have a newer Apple machine, please do so. It will run better. It's faster, uses less energy, and it kind of feels snappier when you are using it because it doesn't have to do the translation between two different instruction sets. We are providing both builds. As you can see, this little screenshot is from our downloads portal. So depending on whichever architecture of your Mac, you will be able to download the build appropriate for your CPU. And so we are not getting rid of the Intel builds, although we are sure that Apple will stop supporting Intel CPUs probably in 2 years or so. At least that's the rumors. So we'll stop building those as well in the future. With this, we've also upgraded Eclipse and Java and so on. So you'll see a lot of smaller changes in the designer as well, but they don't change the way that the product is used. As part of this, we worked on bringing dark mode to Clover. This is something that many of our users have asked for, especially the ones working on Mac, where most of the engineers seem to prefer the dark colors of their UI. So this is what the designer looks like now on Mac. You can, of course, pick slightly different theme if you prefer darker themes, and you can download themes from the Eclipse marketplace. So this is now your option. Nothing changes in the way that the product works. It's just the skin or the theme, so that it will be easier for you if you prefer darker colors, or if your OS is set up to run in dark mode. This works in Windows as well, and so it's not exclusive to Mac OS. So you can play with that in both operating systems. We also improved our CTL language. The first thing is we introduced new syntax for multi-line strings, like you can see on the example on the slide. So instead of having to create a string like this out of typically 4 strings where you add them together through plus sign, you can simply start a multi-line string with 3 double quotes and then it will be 3 double quotes as well. This is something that's common in many other languages like Python and so on. So we've added this kind of syntax to CTL as well. We also added a set of new CTL functions, like, for example, to escape XMLs or unescape XML for message formatting, logging, and so on. I'm not going to cover these functions in more detail, just highlight the one called eval expression. This is an interesting function that allows you to evaluate essentially a string as an expression. This is something that we've used in the past, for example, to implement various configuration tools where the users provide an expression and Clover runs it as part of a job, and the expression is configurable. Oftentimes it's delivered by some sort of an Excel file or something similar. So now we have direct support for this in CTL, which will make building this kind of interfaces or mapping tools much easier. We also improved content assist in CTL editor, so it will now be a bit smarter about offering you a list of fields within your metadata, for example, when you have variables of specific record types and so on. There are many other smaller fixes and security fixes in the whole product as well, as usually. And as always, we also have many other changes. In general, we improved the compatibility with newer databases. So we now support PostgreSQL 15, where we before supported 14 as a server system database. So if you are installing the server, we recommend you go with PostgreSQL 15 as your backend database. If you want to use Microsoft SQL Server, we've upgraded that one as well. So now please use SQL Server 2022, which we upgraded from 2019. This, of course, doesn't affect the sources and targets you connect to. And so database connections that you create as part of your graphs, they stay the same. We did upgrade some drivers there, but it's a minor change. We haven't changed anything significant there. What's interesting is also the changes in log management on server. We've changed the default settings for log rotation and how long the history is kept. So now logs are rotated daily instead of by size. This is something that will help you, especially in cases where you are running quite a lot of jobs on the server, and the default log rotation we used before was simply deleting your logs too soon. So now it's doing it by days, which makes it much faster and easier to find the events in the log that you are looking for. And we also increased the history size because storage is very rarely an issue these days. So keeping a couple 100 megabytes of log around is not a problem at all. It's also now possible to much easier move logs to a different location. There's now one global setting that you can use called clover.logging.dir, which allows you to move all the logs that Clover server creates as it runs to some different location. This will be especially useful to you if you are setting up some sort of backup rules and so on your server installation. As part of this release, we are also removing some functionality, or rather deprecating some functionality. We are deprecating components run, graph, and system execute. These are both very old components that were essentially precursors to our job flow. Before CloverDX had a job flow, we were able to run child jobs and scripts through these two components. They shouldn't be used anymore. We have replacements in job flow components, execute graph, execute job flow, and execute script. The new components, they've been in Clover for almost 10 years now, but they are far more powerful than run, graph, and system execute. They execute your jobs in safer manner and allow you to control the execution much better, including querying, for example, the number of records that was processed and so on. So if you are using run, graph, or system execute, please migrate your jobs to use execute graph and so on, since we will be removing this functionality. For now, the plan is to remove it at the end of the year. At the same time, we are deprecating Tableau writer component. We are deprecating this one because Tableau no longer supports the native libraries that we depend on. So if you are using this one, there is no replacement yet. And depending on feedback, we might implement a new version of the Tableau writer. So if you are using that component, please let us know, and we'll work with you to figure out how to help you in the future. On the server side, we are deprecating simple HTTP API. This is an old API that the server had since the beginning. Now we have a much more powerful REST API that I'll talk about in the rest of the presentation, where we added the library endpoints. So please use the REST API, which is more powerful, provides more functionality, and gives you the results in more consistent way than the old API. The API is still there, right? None of this functionality is removed. It's just marked as deprecated, and the API is disabled by default. So if you install a new instance of CloverDX server, the API will not show up. You will not be able to call it. But if you are using it for something, you can still enable it while you are updating your scripts or third-party tools to call Clover through the new API. Again, if you have any questions about this, please let us know through our support channel or through your account executives. And as I mentioned before, these are all deprecated components that we'll be removing in December. So you have roughly 9 months, or actually even longer, since you don't have to install every release immediately, to migrate your jobs or your tools to use the new ways of working with Clover. So that was the theory, and let's now have a look at the demo. I'll start with Wrangler. And as I mentioned, there are a few improvements that relate to the step list. So I'll start with those. So I'll talk about step groups and step conditions. As I mentioned when showing the slides, step groups are a way for you to group a set of steps together so that you can easily see that they somehow relate to each other and that they belong together. I'm actually going to undo single group. Right, so this is the default that you had in Wrangler before. And if you want to create a group, you can do so. There's a new button in here called Add Group. So for example, let's say I want to add a group in here. I can do that and move my steps into the group simply by drag and drop. Right, it works just like it did before. You can reorder steps within the group. You can move the groups around and so on. The groups themselves do not change the order of execution of the steps. Right? They simply group them so that it's easier to navigate within longer step list. For example, if you look at the job that I have, let me just finish this. You'll see that I have in total 18 steps, and if I expand everything, it doesn't fit on my screen. And something like basic validation is something that I will rarely need to touch, right? So I will just keep it collapsed, and will simply work with my steps over here as I'm working with my job and trying to improve that. Each group can, of course, be renamed, right? You can give it any name that you like. You can also disable the whole group. In my case, if I do this, it will break the job because I'm adding a column in here that I depend on later. But if you need that, you can easily do this too. So those are groups. The second improvement we've made in here are step conditions. You can see them over here. They can also be added to group. So you can conditionally run all the steps in a single group. The way it works is relatively simple. Whenever you have a step, right, when you go to edit the step, you'll see a new section at the beginning of the step where you can create a step condition. Right? This is what it looks like when the condition is not there, and you can then simply enable it and type your expression. This is an expression that has to return a Boolean, and it's evaluated for every record. So as the execution of your job flows, it will, for each record, execute this, and if it's true, it will run whatever step is in here. It doesn't have to be a formula. You can easily add step condition to something like an uppercase, lowercase, and so on. Right? Almost every step can have a condition attached to it, except for steps like, for example, deleting columns, and that cannot be executed conditionally because you wouldn't get a nice table, but rather you'd get kind of jagged data with different number of columns in different records, which is not something you can do in Wrangler. Right, so for pretty much every step, you can add a condition. It can be any complexity, something as simple as this, or even a more complex formula. We'll be improving this in the future to give you more options to create your conditions in a simpler way. And when you look at how this is used, oftentimes what I've seen is that these are used to simplify the formulas. I can relatively easily roll this kind of condition into my formula in here by simply having two if statements, one nested within the another. But when I do it this way, it's much clearer what is actually computed, because this tells me I'm just figuring out whether something is past due or not. And I'm only doing it when the status has not been computed yet. So it's easier to read and navigate. Another improvement well, actually, let me show in here. I talked about formula editor improvements, and so you can easily see. Let's show this. Like, this is a new part of the formula editor that shows you all the functions that you can call in a given place, right? So it's full content assist for functions. It will offer every function that you can call in Wrangler. So in my case, I did paid after days. And as you can see, as I'm typing, it will provide direct feedback by showing me errors and where they are. So it will, for example, tell me that column with this name doesn't exist because I haven't typed the whole thing. So this is something that will help you work with your formulas more effectively, and it should be much easier for you to write formulas that are correct, especially if you need to call functions in Wrangler when you might not remember the parameters of a specific function. Right. Next feature that we implemented is the improvement in mapping. The mapping is something that applies whenever you have a job that writes to a target that requires some sort of a data structure. So for example, in here, I have a target that requires 7 columns to be mapped, right? These are the columns that the target asks me to provide. And this is how I map them. For example, payment ID goes to payment ID, customer ID to customer ID, and so on. And you can drag and drop columns to provide your mapping like this. But since this release, you can also statically assign a value. There's a new dialog for this where you can type any value of a given type. Right? So if I'm mapping a string, I need to provide a string. If it's a date, I need to provide a date, and so on. And it will be assigned to the target field. In the past, what you had to do if you wanted to do something like this, I would have had to create a column with source name and fill it with a static value client A, which of course is quite cumbersome when you look at the job. There would be 2 more steps in here, which is just unnecessary. It's much easier to do it this way. All right, so this is everything about Wrangler. Let's now have a look at the data apps. As I mentioned, we've introduced new output types for data apps. So I have 3 versions of the same data app. Each produces slightly different output. This is the one that we've had before, where I can have an application. Well, in this case, I need to provide some input. So let's give it a range. For example, this one. And then this is the default output of the data app that we've had before. You have essentially a table which you can look at, and you can copy paste, you can search within, and so on. And you can also download raw data. So this was there before. Now we have the ability to also produce, for example, HTML. This is the same application, but it uses defaults. Instead of asking me for a date, it does the last 30 days. And I can produce a report like this. Instead of returning just the data, I'm returning a simple HTML file where I have a chart. It's even a little bit interactive, right? It highlights the column as I go through it. And I have a table with data in here. And this is something that's much easier to look at than just a table. In many cases, visualizing your data in a simple manner is very effective and helps you convey the information much more effectively than just giving users a table. And in the past, you would have to essentially download the file, right? So you were able to return HTML even before, just like this, but there was no preview. Now we can show you a preview of the file instead of forcing you to download. And similarly, if you return just an image, in my case, I'm going to return an SVG with the data. This is what you get. You can, of course, make it larger. So this is something that you can use for very simple reports. And this is, of course, not a replacement for full reporting tool. But if you have something simple that you want to build, you can return a chart like this. Just one note, creating a chart like this is not built into Clover, but we'll be publishing a library that will allow you to create charts like this in a very simple manner, simply by feeding data into them, and it will give you back a picture that you can return as an output of your data app. All right, and the last thing that I wanted to mention is the REST API for the server. So this is where the API lives, right? This is the new API, right? So this is the API that you should be using. The old simple HTTP API is hidden by default, so I don't have any access to it anymore. And the endpoints that we've added in this release are all under the libraries section. So as you can see, we added quite a number of endpoints that allow you to fully manage which libraries are installed on your server and even query the ones that are there.